die, Father, is nothing less. Ever since I was a child, I had a feeling that something is missing in me. I want to know why I am here. Can any of us know that? Become yourself. Then God and the devil don't matter. I want to learn. I want to understand. Be careful. Can you find the force to enable these two quite opposite lives to live together in yourself? At any moment, the wolf can devour the lamb. And you must learn what it means to become responsible. This is an exact science. And that is why you are here.
Before known history to the unknown future. This is Release Radio for the Seeker.
One must strive to know.
Hi folks, welcome back. This is Henrik and you're listening to Red Eyes Radio. Today we have a shorter update for you on the 2013 Bilderberg meeting with Daniel Estulin, an investigative journalist who has been researching the Bilderbergers for over 14 years. He's the author of The True Story of the Bilderberg Group and The Octopus Deception that we talked about last time he was on. He also hosts a show on RT. So let's hear what Daniel has to say about this year's conference. Welcome back, Daniel. Good to talk to you again so soon. Thank you for coming on. A lot of things are ongoing, of course. Bilderberg has now started in Watford, England. I think it's called Watford. Tons of folks there this year. Have you seen any of the footage so far, Daniel?
It's great to be on your show, first of all. I have seen quite a bit. There's a lot of media attention, needless to say, this year. We're getting, I think we're getting a lot of friendly overts from the Bilderbergers this year. It's only logical if you really think about it. I mean, Alex Jones is there, David Icke is there, Kaiser from the Kaiser Report is there, mainstream press is there from the Associated Press and Reuters, BBC, and, the British mainstream media and American media is there. So it's turned into quite a circus, which is, good on the one hand, because it brings Bilderberg a lot more into the mainstream. But as I said, I think, back a month ago when I was on your show for the first time, Bilderberg to a certain point has become, quite irrelevant. It's not a conspiracy theory. A lot of people go off the deep end and make Bilderberg for what it's not. And I think, just one point I'd like to bring out, aside from all the stuff that we know about what Bilderberg is, and no need to go into that, I think that, the dominant narrative of Bilderberg since the beginning, since the 1950s, has been that the organization was very heavily populated by people who came out of the old World War II Nazi apparatus, who were basically, cleaned up and dusted off and employed to become the hardcore, troops in the Cold War, anti-Soviet war, against the communists. People such as Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, and also one of the key architects of Europe, Walter Hallstein, one of the key Nazi lawyers at the time. And so that's the background, to Bilderberg. And today, obviously, nobody talks about that. Yeah. Bilderberg has just become, some kind of a Woodstock from, I think 2013. Right. Did you go to Woodstock? I did. Did you go to the Bilderberg conference? You see like posters of people saying, to hell with Bilderberg, and people, having T-shirts, Bilderberg Conference 2013. The good old days where right. Jim Tucker and I, God bless his soul, and I'm sure he's, up there somewhere watching and having a good time. Of the two of us, going and having to deal with, with the police harassment and persecution, just the two of us against all of these, bad guys. I think they're all gone and over with. And since my book came out for the first time in 2005, people have realized that, hey, let's go out there and party. And there we are, 2013, Watford, the world capital for conspiracy watchers, including the mainstream press.
Well, this is what's so funny about it, because still a lot of mainstream media outlets are actually talking about it like it's not really happening. I mean, this BBC debacle where some of the journalists are still on some level denying it, why other outlets such as The Guardian with Charlie Skeleton and everything else are obviously reporting on this flat out now. So there seems to be kind of not a consensus within the mainstream media of how to deal with this so far.
Well, I think, consensus is really not important. I think, if people, kind of think about it for a little while, they understand that, the way that the media tells us is not really how the world works. And,
Sure.
if you look at, if you look at, in nation states, be it Spain or be it Greece or whatever. I mean, you have a guy in Spain elected by the people, the president of the country, Rajoy, and over 10 million people voted for him. And then, when you try to explain it to the mainstream media in Spain that he's nothing, he's a nobody, he's just a bum boy for the powerful elite, people get upset with you. But the fact is that you have the famous troika coming from Brussels, unelected by anyone, to Spain. And so when they come to Spain, they tell the president of a country elected by somebody what they have to do with the economy, how they have to reorganize the country. And the guy who runs the country, nominally the president, so to speak, he does exactly as he's told or else. That's how the world really works. And the fact that you have the Bilderbergers, who are meeting in England this year, meeting wherever they're going to be meeting next year, do all these things. People have to understand, again, Bilderberg is important to a point. They're not the top of the pyramid. They're not the organization that runs the world. Bilderbergers and the Trilateral Commission, the Council of Foreign Relations, they have operational missions. They're not the seats of power. The organizations, that they don't decide, major policy decisions. They don't decide issues of war and peace. They don't decide questions of genocide. Once these issues are decided on, then the Bilderbergers and Trilateral Commissions and the Council for Relations and the Pinay Circles and so on and so forth, they take this on an operational level and pass it to all the organizations whose members are members of the Bilderberg organization. That's why you have President of the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, European Central Bank, Federal Reserve, the biggest banks in the world. They're all there at the Bilderberg conference because the policy decisions made at a much higher levels, they iron out exactly how, on a technical terms, they're going to be run through the world media and run through the mainstream press and the political committees and so on and so forth. But again, people who think that Bilderberg is the top of the pyramid, they're not. It's a great story, and it's been a fun ride ever since my book came out in 2005. But again, the fact that they have a web page and have a press office right now.
Yeah. Well, they were talk that they were going to do a press conference potentially, even like engage a little bit more in the in the media that actually is there. Do you think that is going to happen to any extent so far?
It might, but it's bread and circus for the great unwashed. I mean, to think look at the Davos meeting. I mean, Davos is a great example of how things run. You have a public face, which is, the media, there are all these people with their credentials, and the president and the prime ministers come in and talk in an open forum with activists from all over the world, and they share stage and concerns. But the real Davos, where real decisions are made, is done behind the scenes, away from the public light, where nobody sees and knows what's going on. That's how things really run.
Yeah.
And they've always run this way, because,
right.
Again, these organizations, Bilderbergers and so on, they represent a certain ideology. It's a medium, basically, of bringing together financial institutions, which are the world's most powerful and most predatory financial interests, publicly speaking. And it's that combination, which is the worst enemy of humanity. Not Bilderberg that's the worst enemy of humanity. I mean, that's insane. Talking about banal conspiracy theories, But it's definitely, the issues that they discuss are of great importance. And one of the issues, for example, from this year's conference is how to avoid another, financial bubble. But again, the point of avoiding a bubble is not, again, the people who think that, they're there, to see how they can fix the world. Well, they're not. Bilderberg is, I did an interview, with these, people, silly people from, the national Spanish, public radio, And, she said, in closing comments, she said, well, hopefully about, this brain trust from, people who have, so much knowledge, maybe they can get together and, help us fix the world. I said to her, they're not there to fix the world. They're there representing 0.1% of the population. And you and I, the great unwashed, we are their enemies. And if they're there, is to make sure that the destruction of the world economy is going to be done in an orderly fashion. That's what people don't seem to understand. But again, there's some very interesting discussions, and we have sources, as you know, which is one of the reasons I've been so much on the money with so many things over the years. My success rate is about 98%. So we always know what these people talk about. And this year's subjects, they talked about the. For example, again, if you look at the official press release of Bilderberger's subject matters, and really what they talked about, they coincide in some, but obviously there are other issues which have nothing to do with what the media have been given. The how to avoid another financial meltdown, that's been one of them. What's going to happen, if Britain avoids, gets out of Europe, that's always, that's been discussed openly in the mainstream press. Mm-hmm. Another issue of this year's conference was the nuclear Iran, and I just got first-hand information, which we're going to talk exclusively, actually, because I literally, it got to me about 5 minutes ago. So I was looking at it as I was waiting for your phone call. Mm-hmm. Another thing, a subject matter is the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. They're talking about the new motors, emerging motors, for world growth. But again, when they're talking about BRICS, they're not talking about BRICS in a way that these nations work together to save the world from the financial meltdown. On the opposite, they're trying to create another bloc to actually, confront, the BRICS and destroy their power as an alternative, to what the elite are trying to do. Another thing that they're talking about is how to reorganize the world's financial system. China is another obvious subject of conversation, and then they're talking about the social model of social welfare. Needless to say, they're not trying to help the world and all the people who are dying of hunger, but how to squeeze the life of what little life these people actually have in them.
Yeah, that's right.
And subject number 8 on the matter is very interesting on their agenda was. And that's something that they're discussing actually today is the security of world food production. Again, people who think that the Bilderbergers, the Henry Kissingers and Rockefellers and and the people from the World Bank and International Monetary Fund are there, thinking of how to save 7 billion people from starvation. No, wrong. It's the opposite.
How do we control the food, supply? What do we do?
How do we control the food?
Yeah. How do we do to spread hunger across the globe? Yeah, we got it.
Exactly, and and the final subject is, I think we've talked about it before, the change in paradigm of society, the technologies of the future, because that's the control. And and I try to explain to people that the technology we have today in our smartphones is more technology than any of those shuttles that actually went to the moon back in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's how powerful technology is today. And it's very interesting that the Googles and the Apples and the Microsofts, the Yahoos, they're there, all of them together, because people who think that Google is a nice, fuzzy little company don't understand that the word Google, Googol, that's how Google is spelled, is an infinite number, 1 to the power of 100.
Yeah.
And infinity, means control. It's directly proportional to control. And Google, and Apple and Microsoft, they're not corporations that compete against each other. All of them form part of this diaspora of control, part of the American security apparatus, and obviously they compete against each other for the control of the markets. That's logical, but they work together, with the American government for controlling the world. So anyway, these are some of the discussion points, and again, it's funny watching. And that's what I thought. The first thing I thought of when I saw the pictures from this year's Bilderberg conference. You have these people in t-shirts and shorts and flippers and beach towels and all these signs and
right.
People selling t-shirts.
Mm.
The first thing I thought of was Woodstock.
Sure.
Back like 50 years from now, people who are going to be in like their 70s, old geezers, bald and fat, and they're going to be saying to their children and grandchildren, hey, man, I was at, at Bilderberg 2013.
Well, it's like kind of set up like a stage a little bit, like a game in a sense that they're also using this to kind of maybe vent some of this anger, and maybe it's even beneficial. I mean, we know that there's ongoing policy being made at these meetings, but at the same time, I think that at this stage, Daniel, they're using this very event for an example to kind of vent a little bit. It's like the publicly suppressed kind of meeting, but everybody knows about it. But still, if we keep it on this level, then the majority of the attention and focus is still going to be rolled up around Bilderberg.
Oh, exactly. And and people are saying, hey, it's a victory, for us. We finally got Bilderberg to admit. I mean, Bilderberg it's never been a secret society. It's been a private organization, and then if there's a secret society, it was a secret society, it was Skull and Bones, which nobody knew anything about until in the 1970s. From 1832 when it was founded in the United States. I mean, that's a secret society.
Yep.
And if you think of some of the areas of discussion, that they're talking about this year and they talked about last year. And if you look, for example, and how to avoid another bubble. Again, that's something that they've already discussed. We have the information from our sources, what they said, and people have to understand that anything that has to do with bailouts, anything that has to do with money flowing into the system, it's a giant trap. And although they're telling you, they're trying to save the economy, what they're doing is, they did it back then, in the 2008, 2009, and they're doing it now. And we're seeing it in Spain and in Greece, and Greece needs another, bailout. What they're doing is the bankers are transferring huge amounts of debt from the private hands, from the banks and other, powerful financial interests to the books of government.
Yeah, that's
because the economy is, continuing to tank.
Yeah.
Okay, it tanked in 2008 and it's tanking today. This debt is absolutely unpayable. There's no way you can, save the economy. And what they're doing at the effect of the bailout is they're bankrupting the government. And that's the real purpose of the bailout, to finish the destruction of the government under the control of this, group called Inter-Alpha, which is, the leading banks in the world, controlled by the British Empire, and that controls about 70% of the money flows that came out of the Bretton Woods, system when Bretton Woods was destroyed back in the early 1970s.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing of what they're doing right now. And that's the whole thing of the bailout. And you're watching nations of the world, one after another being destroyed and being replaced by fascist dictatorships, by international global fascist or imperial cabal. And again, which is why, what I said, Bilderberg was initially, going back to the fascist apparatus, it's still the same apparatus. They just made it public and maybe made it popular, but the whole thing hasn't changed. And if we're talking about back in 2008, the 16 trillion bailout by the Fed, but a lot of that money went to the European banks. It had nothing to do with saving the United States. They lied about the real intent. What they were trying to do is to save the British Empire system or the imperial system. They weren't trying to save the U.S. banks, or they wouldn't have given all this money to foreign banks. They wanted to save the system, which is, in a way, is what you have to do if you have this global system full of derivatives. So if it blows up in one place, it blows up everywhere else.
Yeah.
So you have to protect the weakest banks. It's like you're putting out the fires. So if you put out, the fire whenever it breaks out, otherwise the whole place, can burn down. And that's what they're talking about at the meeting. So they're not talking about, how to avoid another bubble. They're talking about, how to make sure they control, all those blowouts while they're still destroying the system, voluntarily.
Well,
so
this
I
is...
have to,
Yeah, I just wanted to interject there. I mean, officially, if you look at some of the people who have been talking with media who are insiders or attending the meeting, or past people who have been attending, like even Lord Carrington, I was reading this article today from the Telegraph, they're constantly saying that they appreciate the meeting for the fact that they can finally talk openly about what they really think. And it's just amazing that they say that in the paper, because as politicians and representatives of the people, quote unquote, this is the ideology of what they have. Because if people really knew what they were thinking about and what they wanted to, the policies that they wanted to interject here, then people would be angry with it. They would be upset with it. So here's a chance for them to talk.
The thing is that all of the meetings are secret. It doesn't matter if you're talking about Davos, you're talking about G8, you're talking about G20, you're talking about Bilderberg, you're talking about Trilateral Commission, Council for Relations, Bohemian Grove, the Penai Circle. all of these meetings, they're all secret.
Yeah, that's right.
International Monetary Fund, World Bank, meetings and committee meetings and, group meetings and division meetings. And, it's, people think that Bilderberg is like, all of these people meet all the time.
Yeah.
And it's normal, you have powerful people, who can meet in secret or private or can go to somebody's house, and sit at David Rockefeller's estate, which is like 70 acres in the state of New York, and they can talk about anything they want and nobody knows what they're talking about.
Yeah,
and the thing is that it's done all the time. So people who say that, they only can do this at Bilderberg, it's a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah, yeah.
Lord Carrington has been doing this all the time, and he can meet with the Queen and sit, in front of her on her lap or wherever he sits under her feet, while kissing a, little old ugly toe. All this stuff is done all the time. So people, say that, oh, no, they're talking in secret and private at Bilderberg. It's nonsense. Davos is secret. And the public face has nothing to do with the reality of Davos. Trilateral Commission meetings are secret. Council of Foreign Relations meetings are secret. World Bank meetings are secret. G8 meetings are secret. You have the press, but the press doesn't know anything that they don't want you to tell. They don't want you to know.
Well, they have press releases, right? These meetings, as Davos, for example, there they have that, okay, now it's time for the interaction with the press, and then they tell them, they have the scripted
exactly,
speeches.
But the real stuff is not discussed in public.
Of course not.
Yeah. So again, but what they're trying to do is, they're trying to save the system. Well, we're seeing this in Spain, we're seeing it in other countries, that this debt is simply unpayable. And no matter how you look at it, what they're trying to do is trying to save this money. Okay, the system is not coming back, and but this is virtual money; it doesn't exist. Okay,
yeah.
The debt can never be paid, which is one of the things I talk about in the Octopus Conspiracy. $223 trillion. It's virtual money. Okay, and it can never be paid on the derivatives. They have no value. It's all sham. It's like monopoly money. But in trying to save that, we're going to destroy ourselves, destroying the nations, and that's what this whole thing really represents. And that's why you see them buying it, because most of these banks that are buying this, they'll be thrown away anyway, fed to the sharks. But the nations are going to go first. And once the nations are gone, and then the empire can reorganize itself however it wants and set up a new monetary system, which is exactly what is being done. You know what I mean? And, another thing, I know we don't have a lot of time, but another thing is, all the stuff that they're talking about in Iran, which is very important. And again, you'll be the first one on the show to actually hear about this, because I literally just got my information 5 minutes ago or half an hour ago.
What is something that it says? What is something that you have here?
Well, again, the Iran issue, they're talking about, the Iran nuclear program. But what they're really talking about is, they need to control the people who are going to be running in the Iranian presidential elections next week. Because, again, after Syria comes Iran, after Iran comes Russia. Okay, it's not like Iran, is an end game. Iran is just a nation. Okay, but there's an end game in this whole game. And the end game is until you can control Russia and China, okay, you don't control the world, and Russia is a military power, okay,
yeah.
And China is an economic power. China is not a military power. China has a lot of people, but it doesn't have the technology that Russia has.
Yeah.
So until you can control Russia, until you get back to the good old 1990s when you had third-rate, nobodies, assistant of an assistant of an assistant, bum boy, the toe cleaner, with this, coming to Russia and lecturing the president of the nation,
yeah.
What he has to do and has to, reorganize. Who are these people? They're nobody, So one of the things, again, they talked about at the Bilderberg conference yesterday about the whole thing in Iran. Next week you have presidential elections, okay? Mm. And the presidential elections in Iran will serve as a national referendum on the country's nuclear diplomacy, okay? And that's one of the things that they talked about, because you have 8 candidates, certified candidates on the ballot, and amongst them you have former and present nuclear negotiators, okay, who are offering different alternatives.
Yeah.
On the one hand, and this is the hand that the Bilderbergers are squarely behind, is a guy by the name of Hassan Rouhani. Okay, he's a British-educated cleric, okay, who led the Iranian nuclear negotiation team from 2003 to 2005. Okay, and the Bilderbergers call him nuclear pragmatist. Okay, which is just another way of saying, let's get this British stooge, on our side. Okay, so you have this guy who is going to be squarely, if you watch the mainstream media, They're going to be talking wonders about this guy, Hassan Rouhani. His name is spelled Rouhana. And please forgive me if I, mispronounced his name. Some of the sounds, with my Russian palatar, don't work very well. I'm afraid to hurt my mouth. Okay.
Right.
Then you have another guy, okay, and this is a guy that Bilderberg is going to be squarely against. His name is Saeed Jalili, Jalili. Now, this is the guy who is the current head of Iranian's nuclear negotiation team, and he's considered to be a front runner by the elements of the Iranian media. And the Bilderbergers also see him as, the main enemy, quote unquote, or difficulty, towards a more malleable Iran. So he is considered, a hardline negotiator, and his position is hardline stance to the West's position of dismantling Iran's nuclear program. So there's a great deal of concern from Bilderberg about what's going to happen in next week's election. And also, Bilderberg is very aware that there's a lot of concern in Iran about pending U.S. legislation on Iran that focuses on, depriving Iran of access to its oil proceeds, for example. Okay? Basically, they're talking about economy without oil dependency. That's another phrase you're going to see a lot in the mainstream press very, very, very shortly. So you're talking about, Bilderberg also talked, as far as Iran is concerned, the looming budgetary crisis of the state. Okay, which is gonna how it's gonna transpire, through very hostile, Western, punishing Western sanctions.
Yeah.
And what Bilderberg basically agrees on is that no matter who wins, Iran's enrichment program will continue, and no matter what you do with the sanctions, it's still going to go on. And there lies the riddle of nuclear crisis, okay, for Bilderberg and for the world. And few policy experts in Iran hope that there's going to be a change, shift by the United States government in light of Obama's record of, towing Israel's prescription for crippling sanctions on Iran. So again, there's a lot of, uncertainty. They're talking about, again, quoting literally from Bilderberg meeting, the uncertainty lies in the riddle of the nuclear crisis. What's going to happen, short term with all the stuff. The Bilderbergers are supporting one candidate, or at least that's the consensus from the meeting.
Yeah.
Because, again, as far as Bilderberg is concerned, nobody tells, any of the members what to do. But they reach a consensus because you have 120, 130 delegates who break up in groups of 20, and they prepare the reports, before the meeting on issues which they will be discussing at the meeting. And then after each report, there's a group debate on the policy. And what they do is that once they debate it in small groups, then they get together and debate it together once they actually can iron out, 2 or 3 alternatives. And then they come up with a common policy of what to do and how to approach it internationally. That's why the media is going to all be towing a certain line. The politicians, the economists, the financiers, they're all going to be working together towards a particular goal. But you have 2 candidates out of the 8. One is the consensus candidate for the Bilderbergers, and the other one is a hardline candidate for the Iranians. Obviously, Bilderberg doesn't want Iran to continue with their nuclear program, not because it's a nuclear program, that's a danger in the world, because, Iran does not pose any danger to the world. If there is one nation that poses danger, to the world, that's Israel. It's not even the United States.
Yeah.
It's Israel, And if you can get rid of Israel of its nuclear program, if you can disarm a goon, they become worthless, useless, and powerless, because that's what they are. They're just a goon, and that's the same thing we said. People like Bush. You take away his arms, they're just nothing. You take Israel's guns and arms, they're nothing. So, and that's, so Iran is not an enemy. Iran is the enemy of Bilderberg and the elite because they want to have their own nuclear program, not because they want to bomb someone into oblivion. I think it's obvious. But because any nation in the world, has the right, okay, to make sure that their nation is better off today than it was yesterday. Okay, and nuclear technology, nuclear power is, infinitely better than oil, than, coal. And after nuclear, you have, fusion. You need that for the nation to improve the possibilities of the country, to improve the economy per square meter of space against nature. And needless to say, the Israelis and the Americans don't want Iran to develop, because progress and development is directly proportional to population density, to the wealth of a nation, to their development technologically. If you want to conquer states and enslave them, you don't want people have nuclear power. That's why they're trying to destroy Iran.
Yeah. Let me ask you this: we're shortly running out of time here. A couple of more questions. Are there any good insiders within Bilderberg, as far as you know? I mean, Alex Jones talked about being in communication with some folks on the inside, including, I think, former PayPal founder Peter Thiel, who is on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group. But there have been claims that he's more, well, what should we say, more anti-New World Order, allegedly. I don't know if that helps in any regard to sort anything out on that note. But what do you know about that, Daniel?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I can't get into Alex's head. I don't know what's in there.
No, sure.
But I can tell you that,
someone like Peter Thiel, if there's people on the inside who actually have...
I don't think so. I mean, it's like the people who form part of... First of all, if that was the case, okay, then he would no longer be, part of Bilderberg, and that would have, taken them out of the equation, and we would now, PayPal would have disappeared, and then be replaced by another company.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, anyone who's there, is there because, they've made it. You could say it's like, I've made it. You've gotten to a point where you admit it, admit it to a group of people of certain power in the world stage.
Yeah.
So once you made it, you don't want to give up that position. Because, there's always somebody else who's trying to get to your position, and they can get rid of you, they'll take over your seat. You know what I mean? So I have difficulty believing that anybody who's there, will openly come out and give the names and, saying that, they're against one. It's nonsense. I don't think so.
They'll be kicked out right away.
I have people, exactly, you know what I mean? I have people, for years who've been members, and some of them still are, who don't come on an annual basis, but who come once in a while to these conferences, and all the attendees, even past attendees who are not invited anymore, they get, not a full Bilderberg report, but they get, a summarized, a shorter version, 10, 12-page Bilderberg report that explains what everybody talked about. This way you keep, the networking going, and you keep all these people, in there. And the threat is obviously if you talk, you're going to be excluded from this. You're not going to be killed. You don't need to do that anymore. You know what I mean? So and that's one of the reasons my prediction rates have been so good over the years. Going back, in 2005, I talked about oil prices going to $100 a barrel, and when it was like 30, I think, and that came through, and I said that the gold is going to go into 1,000, where it was 300 in 2005. That happened. I predicted, several years in advance, the housing meltdown in 2007. It just happened like on the money, literally. And so I can tell you that I have people there who've been members, which is one of the reasons I don't bother going to the Bilderberg conference anymore, because, I was never a big fan of Woodstock to begin with, okay? I always thought of, hippies as, dirty, filthy, and immoral. But, and Bilderberg has become more of a hippie movement than anything else, but, certainly the information, comes to me as it always has in the past, and we always get, key information and good information out into the open, and this thing in Iran is obviously, is just, hot off the presses. But, I think there are people who come to these meetings who might not agree, in full to some of the things that are going on. And also, a lot of the people who are invited, they don't understand that there's an organized, formal structure to these meetings. I think they do now because of my book and because of all the press. They can actually go and find information and say, hey, there's a structure to it. But in the past, people will go to these meetings, and who wouldn't want to, if you're a university professor, if you're some guy, who's studying some kind of a chromosome, that has nothing to do with, with world finances,
right.
And you're invited to this meeting to share this information because that information is useful for Monsanto's control of the world's food supply.
Yeah.
Hey, wouldn't you want to go and meet Rockefeller and David and Kissinger and all these people, as Zbigniew Brzezinski, and the president of whatever country in the world, of France, and the Wallenbergs from Sweden and Carl Bildt, and sit with them at the same table and share your experiences and be part of this networking? Well, I would. I mean, you would. Anybody would. Why not? But the fact is that you understand there's a structure behind it, and these people have, long-range plans, have very little to do with your expertise in a particular area of chromosomes. You know what I mean? That's a game changer. You know what I mean? And in the past, a lot of these people didn't know that there was a structure, and that's why they came, happily and readily, and were willing to share all this information. But I think now it's different.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. All right, well, that's a quick update on the 2013 meeting, of course. A circus as usual. We'll have to let you go for now, Daniel. I know you're a busy guy, but give us your website and mention your book titles again for more on the backstory on the Bilderbergs, of course.
Yeah, it's danielestulin.com. I have a new book, The Octopus Deception, which is a novel, but it's based mostly on 14, 15 years of investigative journalism. It's kind of a mix between John le Carré and Robert Ludlum. And I don't know if you had a chance to finish it, but if
I've been enjoying it very much,
yeah.
Daniel. I've been enjoying it. I've been really busy, but I've been reading it more, and it's a great book. So well written.
Excellent. Well, listen, maybe we can touch base soon, and I can tell you what else Bilderberg talked about.
Yeah, we should do that. Thanks for the update, Daniel. Really appreciate it. Have a good
Take care.
rest of your day. Okay,
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, folks, thank you for listening. We'll be back next with Stephen Greer talking about the controversial Sirius film. Also a 1-hour segment while we're still out on the road. And after this, we'll be back in normal capacity with Maurice Cottrell. Much more coming after this. RedIceCreations.com and RedIceMembers.com is our websites where we have much more for you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll speak to you soon. Have a good one. Take it easy.